Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the artist panel discussion for our current exhibition, Sacred Motherhood. My name is Corinne Pompéy. I'm the program coordinator here at Woman Made. And for those not familiar, we are a nonprofit gallery. We were founded in 1992 by Beata Minkowski and Kelly Hansen. And since then, we've shown the works of more than 10,000 women and non-binary artists in over 475 exhibitions, one of those being Sacred Motherhood. So for a little overview about the exhibition, Sacred Motherhood is comprised of works from 44 artists. It's an exhibition that explores the evolving maternal figure and contemporary motherhood or caregiving and what that looks like in this modern age. So here's just a sneak peek of all the works that we have. This is on our website. If you haven't seen it yet, you can just go to womanmade.org/sacred motherhood to see the virtual exhibition. So, just an overview of our panel structure. We are joined, hopefully soon, by our juror, Kiki McGrath, and four exhibiting artists, Emily Mayo, Potowski, Schetauna Powell, and Rhonda Urdang. So during this panel, we're going to hear from Kiki about her experience jurying and hear from our artists about their inspirations and backgrounds, and also just learn more about everybody's views on contemporary motherhood. So before we get into it, I'd like to give you all a little bit more background on who we have on this panel. So I'm going to start with Emily for now.
Oh,
Um,
Kiki's here.
oh,
She's here.
perfect. Awesome. Hi,
Yeah, you
Kiki.
can go back.
Hello, hello.
Hi. So we are honored to have Kiki McGrath with us. She's an interdisciplinary artist and curator whose work explores ritual, labor, and social history. She's currently the visual arts editor for EcoTheo Review, and she curates shows in nonprofit and alternative sites and hosts the project space Coach House One. We are also joined by Emily Mayo. Emily is an artist whose work explores themes of compassion, holiness, and personal experience, often reframing historical imagery like Madonna and Child in contemporary contexts. She is currently teaching at Hope College. Kim Potowski is a mixed media artist whose work explores reproduction, genetic and cultural lineage, and dysphoria, often through reinterpretations of Catholic iconography. She's also a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where her photography has been on display since 2011. Next, we have Schetauna Powell, who is a writer, researcher, and designer whose work bridges African American literature, language, and material objects to communicate complex ideas through play and translations. With a background in English literature, African American studies, and design objects, she's currently the 2024 to 2027 Daniel and Ada Rice Fellow in Architecture and Design at the Art Institute. And we have Rhonda Urdang, who is an interdisciplinary artist whose work is deeply influenced by intersectional feminism and social movements, challenging narratives through painting, collage, and experimental film. As the founder of Flagstaff Feminist Art Studio, she uses art as a tool for reappropriation and socio-political empowerment. So thank you to everybody for being on this panel. I'm excited to get this going. So I'm just going to kick things off with Kiki. If you don't mind sharing with us what your experience jurying for the show was and also your inspirations for choosing this theme.
Sure, and thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Corinne, for hosting this and for Woman Made Gallery. I think it's a rare space in Chicago, especially for art and community, and during the moments of change that we're going through right now. I think it's a really powerful place. So I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be surrounded by these artists in the show.
Mhm.
Um, So the first question I can answer by saying that the inspiration for this show came from a postcard in the Hull House Museum, which is very close to Woman Made Gallery, and it's a small postcard of a woman hunched over her sewing machine, nursing a baby, children in the background, laundry. It's called Sacred Motherhood with a dollar sign, and she just looks so exhausted and sad. And I saw that and then thought of all the lifetime of Madonna paintings I've seen, of happy women and chubby babies and this sense of motherhood that's serene and safe. And I thought, what is these two poles? I would like to know what contemporary artists would make of that. Um, so that was kind of the hope for the show, was that bringing contemporary artists to make a comment on contemporary motherhood. And what I found when I juried the show was one of surprise, that we received 172 submissions, which was a great number. And I'm sorry that we could only choose 44 based on the size of the gallery. But I was also moved by the range and revelation of how personal a lot of the work really is. Um, Physical, emotional, life and death issues, economic issues, spirituality. There are images that reference the Madonna, certainly, like Emily's, and then there are images that reference the exhausted laborer, but everything in between, the lived realities, are not at all stereotypical. So I'm delighted that the show really seemed to invite people to put work in that was meaningful and authentic. And the qualities that I looked for, first on the formal level, just a handling of materials. Can artists make work that's strong in impression and hold your attention when you look a second time? I wanted a range. We have drawing, painting, video, performance, sculpture, textile, AI. We've got a whole range of things. And I think what stood out for me about the artist's work that I chose for this panel is there's some authentic response, some emotional. I don't know, I responded emotionally to their authenticity. Maybe that's how I would say it. A lot of them took traditional subjects in new ways, and I was just surprised by what I saw.
A good surprise.
Yes, good surprise.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar, can you explain the kind of meaning behind the dollar sign in sacred?
Yes. So I think the dollar sign for me, I feel like there's always an economic element of motherhood, and I really wanted to push on that in hopes that people would um, take it from whatever angle they wanted. But I think the angle that I'm interested in is how does economic labor, emotional labor, all the things that you never read about in the baby book, but that actually come really and inform the way you live your life. That's what I was hoping that people might pick up on.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely clear that each piece that you chose brings a unique perspective to the overall theme. So building on that, I would love to hear from our artists now. So I just want to say a little prompt to have us meet on the same page. So motherhood and caregiving are deeply personal experiences, as you all know, but they don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're shaped by cultural narratives, family structures, and social expectations. So, as artists, each of you have navigated this tension between personal truth and broader social themes. So, I'd like to start by discussing kind of how that plays out in each of your works. So, Kim and Emily, I would love to hear both discuss how emotional and psychological aspects of caregiving appear in your work. Emily, would you care to start?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity for one, and thank you, Kiki, again for choosing my work. I really appreciate it. Just want to point out here, I think there's a typo. That's the top line there is not the title of the piece, but
Oops,
that's okay. I don't mind it. I just want to give context. My title of the piece is Madonna and Child. Anyway, my title of my piece is a little
sorry
bit
about
more
that.
direct. No, that's totally fine. Just, for everybody who's reading it. So yeah, emotional and psychological toll, I think, is a little, yeah. But my piece, this was kind of a genesis of new work for me. This was me coming right out of postpartum time, and I struggled quite a bit with postpartum depression with my second child, and so I was really actually inspired by the book by Catherine Riggett's, this very new book, The Mother Artist, and it really kind of awoke this new inspiration for me to that I do have a voice, I do have something that I want to talk about. I was also reminded of the Victorian hidden mother photographs from, you're editing it right now. Victorian, like Victorian hidden mother photographs from when, like when photography was first invented. I don't know if you guys know anything about those, but it's a really interesting era of photography, where the mothers were, photography, they were wanting to get images of the children, but the children wouldn't sit still for long enough, so the mothers had to hold the children, but they didn't want the mothers in the photographs. So some of the very first images that we have of mothers are of this draped figure in the background. It's just a very interesting and pointed imagery, and I've just found a lot of resonate. Like I just resonated a lot with that coming through postpartum depression. I felt like that really captured a lot of the heaviness of what that is. And then I also wanted to comment on like breastfeeding, the covering, uncovering societal norms, right? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm pointing to as far as psychological and emotional aspects. I mean, it does have a psychological toll, and I wanted to make a piece that just showed what it felt like. I'm also a Christian, and so I was looking at the like traditional motherhood imagery, which of course is the Madonna, and I wanted to put that in another context. And so yeah, so this came out, but I could keep talking about, you know, that stuff. I'll let Kim answer the question.
Okay, yeah, I want to echo what Emily said. I want to it's a real honor, Kiki, to have been selected for this exhibit. So I'm glad yeah, thank you. So the question I believe was how emotional and psychological aspects of caregiving appear in my work, right?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to show my piece while I was talking about it.
Yes.
Okay,
There.
cool. So I gave birth to two people and I raised them. That's usually how motherhood works, but it's not always how motherhood works. I was actually raised by a woman who did not give birth to me. And I'm actually not legally related to the woman who did give birth to me. And that's the life of an adoptee. And there are about, 2% of the US population, it's estimated, is adopted. I was a domestic same race adoptee. So that meant that I passed, right, as a member as a biological member of my family. There's a whole bunch of different things involved when you don't pass, right? Everybody knows you were adopted, and that's got its own set of things. But when you pass, it's like you're in the closet in a way, right? And it wasn't until I was in my 20s where I started to actually tell people, oh yeah, I was adopted, right? And when I was 22, I met my biological family. But anyway, this piece I think reflects on, it tries to subvert the following narrative. A lot of folks who were adopted, myself included, were told, oh, we chose you, you know? And I knew, people always ask, when did you know? I've always, since the time I could comprehend language, my dad made it a point, to tell me, well, and I flew out to California and I got you and I brought you back to New York. I was raised on Long Island. My mother had experienced a death. The baby died, and I apologize. This is I don't hope I'm not triggering. It's kind of sad stuff, but she had a baby die in utero, and this was before Roe v. Wade. So you had to walk around with it in there until it decided to expel itself, and that I'm sure was extraordinarily traumatic. She did not talk about it. She's passed now, but anyway, that's why they told her you need to go adopt, right? And so I'm like, okay, you chose me, and in your little head, you're like, where does that? Did you go to the baby store? Like, what? Did you look through and see a whole bunch of babies, and then that one, that's the one I want, right? And what this piece suggests, it I think plays with the idea, okay, yeah, you chose me, but guess what? I chose you too, right? And you gotta kind of have to, I'll say, subscribe to a certain kind of philosophy, right? That says, we all sort of come here with this like sort of menu of choices. I'm going to go through this. All right, coach, put me in. I want to go learn some stuff. And I want to learn what it's like to be, separated from your biological family and yada, yada, yada. And so if you take this to its logical conclusion, then I chose all four of these people, right? So what you've got here are four bassinets, right? It's meant to feel like in the hospital, and Beate had the fabulous idea to put these all in the window so that when people were walking by Women Made Gallery, they could like see the babies in the window, right? Like maybe they're for sale. And each one has a fabric that to me sort of just communicates something about each of those people. And then each of the babies has a cyanotype print that I did of photos. The kids are approximately 8, 9, 10-ish in all these photos. And these 4 people are my 4 parents, right? 2 of them are biological, 2 of them are social. And yeah, it's that's whenever I watch, like, I don't know if you guys watched Call the Midwife or you watch any of these shows where there's or This Is Us, right, where you just see babies and you see them in the bassinets and you see them in the hospitals and stuff like that. That's always sort of triggered for me this idea of, oh God, it looks like a baby store. And so this to me was sort of a very liberating therapeutic way to sort of deal with what might that mothering have, right, felt like for the woman who raised a child she didn't give birth to. What might mothering be like for the biological mother who was 15? And then I got to meet her when I was 22, and she has been mothering me in a different way, right, since I've been an adult, since I met her. And in what ways might that, I don't know, inform my motherhood experiences? Were a little simpler in the sense that I gave birth to some kids and then I raised them. But there's just always something in your mind when you look at people that you're related to, right? Because for 22 years, I did not have that. So when you have your own kids and you look at them, you're like, wow, we are related, So I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. I would love to open it up to Schetauna and Rhonda. I kind of want to hear how both of your bodies of work redefine motherhood within these contexts. We can start with Rhonda.
I'm a little vague on the question. Could you narrow it down for me a little bit?
Yeah, so how does your body of work redefine motherhood within our cultural and systemic contexts?
You're asking about my body of work or this particular work that I did?
Let's do this particular work.
Okay, this particular work, I live here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and you will notice the girl in the coffin below the Virgin Mary. Yes. Well, in my town, there's a historic mansion, and it was built by 2 Irish brothers. Their names were Timothy and Michael Reardon, and they married sisters, Carolyn and Elizabeth Metz. And in 1904, the architect who built the El Tovar Hotel at the Grand Canyon, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, hopefully you've been to this gorgeous hotel. But they live in this mansion in my town, which I've been to about a half a dozen times, especially on St. Patrick's Day when they have whiskey tasting. And the mansion is supposedly haunted with the little girl in the coffin. Actually, she was 27 years old when she died of polio. And of course, they were very devastated. They're a very wealthy family. The duplex they lived in, one side, the brother and his wife lived, and the other side, the other brother and his wife lived, and they were Catholics, and they had a big Irish family, and they were very wealthy. They earned their money from the lumber, the timber industry. They built railroads. They were into banking. They were also into politics and cattle. And that's where where I started this piece, which I made 9 years ago. So I have to go back and think about it, but I remember it being a meditative piece that it's really about the transmigration of souls and it's about reincarnation. And it's I have some Irish blood back in my ancestry, so for me, I was kind of building my own folklore when I made this piece. And in the mansion, there's a little vestibule with a little chapel, of course, with the Virgin Mary, and there are always lit candles there. So I think when I made this piece, it was kind of a healing piece for me somehow, because it has to do with death and children in the Victorian era. And you'll also see letters and numbers. I'm very interested in numerology and the spiritual connotations that numbers have. And I was raised a Lutheran. My best friend was a Catholic. My best friend just called me today at 3 o'clock. Her mother, Betty, died last night and told me about her mother's funeral that's going to be on Friday. My mother, Marlene, and Susan's mother, Betty, were best friends. And my mother died 4 years ago during COVID. I wasn't able to, none of us were able to go to her funeral. So it's really about complicated mourning, complicated grief. So I guess maybe I'll stop there.
Yes, no, thank you. I think all of the artists here in the whole show can relate to the sense of healing, that this piece, their piece is a sense of healing for them. So thank you for sharing that, Rhonda. Schetauna, I would love to hear from you now. Again, just how does your work redefine motherhood?
First, thank you for having me. Always enjoy being in your shows, Corinne. So thank you, Woman Made Gallery, for having me. And thank you, Kiki, for choosing my work. On the screen is actually a mock-up, which is kind of funny. When I applied, I wrote in the description, this is a mock-up. So it's very funny to see my mock-up on the screen. But my work has multiple origin stories. I think the simplest one is that I'm making a toy for a child to play with. So, using simple geometry that comes from quilts made by African American women in the South. So a lot of what I'm doing has the theme of motherhood kind of imbued in it from the start. The idea of this piece, I called it Tea Time Retablo. The original base idea is that you would hang this in a child's room, and then they could rearrange the little circles with the pictures in it. And that's how you learn your family members' names, especially for little kids. But the pictures in it are like a yearly photo shoot that I do with my family. And they're always different. They're always themed differently. And so it's really for us to explore. It's really for us to play. This one, my daughter said she wanted to be a princess having tea. And I was like, well, we're having tea for the photo shoot. And I had just graduated as well. So it was a celebration of her birthday, of Mother's Day, of my graduation. So when I think of this, I'm also thinking about this book that I was really impacted by called We Live for the We. And when I was pregnant, I was looking for a book that would talk to me about what it means to be pregnant as a Black woman. And I wasn't satisfied with a lot of the things I was finding on the market. But that book was so wonderful. I listened to it, like the audio version of it. And one of the things that really stuck with me is the title and the meaning that she kind of talks about that title means throughout the book, which is like Black motherhood is something that you kind of learn through being like a Black woman's daughter. And the idea is like it's always we, like we're always gonna look out for each other. Um, you do a lot of kin keeping, which means like you got to call your family on Sundays. You got to make sure that, you know, keeping in touch, things are well, you're keeping your connections. Um, you know, in that book, Danny, her name is Danny, I think her last name is McLean, talks about how she's a journalist and she interviewed like a lot of women who were like active politically or just like had careers. And it was that was that thread of kind of like you learn how to take care of each other. And that's something taught to you from your mother. Um, and so that's something else I think this piece is about, kind of thinking through what is Black motherhood materially, because also quilts are made to share family stories. And then how do you take all that information and give it to a baby? Like, how do you take all of that stuff and hand it to the youngest person you know? That's also what this piece is about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody's responses. I'd like to touch on, I want to shift gears now, to kind of touch on something that I think you all can relate to, right? This invisible work of motherhood, right? Motherhood and caregiving are not just emotional roles, they're forms of labor that are historically undervalued, unpaid, and feminized, right? So given that, it's also funny because they're essential to the survival of families and communities, right? So your work makes this labor visible in a lot of different ways. So I'd like to open the floor about how each of you reflect on this emotional, physical, or economic toll of caregiving. Emily and Kim, I want to start with you both. Both of you have kind of a sense of intimacy that both feels loving and weighty. How do you both balance showing this tenderness of caregiving without erasing the exhaustion, loss of self, perhaps resentment and sacrifice that often comes with it? Let's start with Kim.
You know, to the extent that my piece in some ways isn't, I mean, it's about motherhood, but perhaps not the day-to-day
Right.
travails of the motherhood, right? It's more about the initiation of how one can become a mother, right? There's a lot of different ways that can happen. But I think what your question makes me want to reflect on is what are some of the loss of, okay, you said loss of self,
Yeah.
sacrifice, right? I mean, so how would I, you know, we can all talk about, you know, as mothers, the loss of self and the sacrifice and the exhaustion and all that. What about the adoption experience might add new wrinkles or different wrinkles to that whole thing? I think for the birth mother, and I'd have to ask, you know, her about this, but I've read, you know, enough, and we've talked a little bit about it. There's this sense of a phantom limb. You know, you gave birth to this child, right? And then your breasts are leaking, but there's no child to feed. You know, this came up a lot actually on, if you watched Call the Midwife, it was, you know, for those mothers who had their babies either taken or they gave the baby away voluntarily, that was a thing that would happen, right? And then you're just supposed to go back to your life. And I was actually at the end of what, if you Google this up, it's called the baby scoop era, which happened right after World War II, right up through the 70s. So I was born in the 70s, so I'm at the end of the baby scoop era, which is when, yeah, women started having, not started having, but there was more sex outside of marriage. There was no birth control, really. It was hard to get a hold of. So you had all these white babies being born that these white people wanted to adopt. And then when birth control, you know, comes around, as does abortion via Roe v. Wade, that's when white affluent families turn to Korea. And then that's a whole separate, Korea and China. So that's a whole separate, and I'm learning more and more about this as I'm attending more and more adoptee, meetings and things like that. In fact, the first place I ever showed this was at the Critical Studies of Adoption conference out at Brown University. So there's that wrinkle, that phantom limb, that's that piece of you that, and not all people feel this way. There's got to be, I assume, mothers out there or women out there who've given birth and then infants taken away, and that's it. I'm sure that's a thing. You can't reduce everybody's experience similarly, but there's a lot of folks out there who, and I can't just forget about it and move on with my life and say, oh, I gave them what was best for them, right? Another added wrinkle on the motherhood of the adoptive mother, right? Things have gotten a little better. There's like at least 10 podcasts that I've counted for, if you're adopting, here's like a podcast thing you should think about and talk about. Yeah, no, it wasn't that way in the 70s, right? You were just supposed to just shut up, raise this kid and like, in fact, my mother didn't even want to tell me I was adopted, right? My dad sort of made her do it. So there's this wrinkle of this kid isn't really mine. What if the kid does something, I don't know, misbehaves or doesn't learn how to potty train or just anything that can happen to kids? You're kind of like, is this broken? Do I have my receipt? Can I return it? There's these ideas of like, what kind of merchandise do I have here? Right. That I think it comes up quite frequently in adoptee mother narratives. And then, from the kid perspective, just to say, looking at the mother, right? I'm sure everybody has probably thought this, right? The kid can say, well, you're not my real mother, right? You're not my real mother. What does that mean to the woman who is your social mother, right? Your real mother is the one who mothered you, the one who took you to the doctor, the one who fed you, the one who did all this stuff for all this time, right? That's to me very real. But when people say real, they mean biological. So does biological mean real? And right? So I think there's a lot of stuff that both birth mothers who've relinquished children and adoptive mothers who have adopted and are raising adopted children have to navigate on top of, right, all the other like stuff that we have to do as mothers.
Yeah, definitely. Emily, can you kind of jump in here and connect your work to the topics of kind of this balancing, of explaining, the tenderness of caregiving, but also exhaustion?
Yeah, so I guess it's pretty apparent from the image itself. Yeah, if you go back to the drawing. But yeah, I guess I'll just touch on like what I didn't talk about earlier too, is just like the paradoxical nature of both losing and finding yourself in motherhood. So like there is an erasure of yourself in many ways, but then there's also a finding of yourself as well. And all of this is a labor of love, right? It's for the sake of newness of life, which is the way that we recoup, right? It's the beauty at the other end of the pain. And so that is a lot of what my work is about as well, is showing that that other side of the pain. Yeah, the loss of self-sacrifice. Yeah, and to Kim's point, there and I was going to mention my husband at some point too, of the fact of like there's just different ways. There are different mothers, right? My husband was adopted as well, and his mother is very much his mother, but in order for her to even have had the experience of being mother, which she wanted so desperately but couldn't do herself, there had to be another mother to make that sacrifice, and then another sacrifice, right, to give the child up, which we've never met her. But there is just, and that's what this work was about for me, and this like body of work that I'm getting into is about really examining this new identity that I have as mother that I never fully understood until having gone through it. I had a lot of friends who had given birth, and I had kids a little bit later, not that much later, but a little bit later. My friends were having kids earlier than me, and I was realizing I knew I didn't relate to them in their time of life, but I did not fully understand what they were going through until until now. And I really wanted to make work about that. The reason why I waited so long to have children actually had a lot to do with what the narrative that I had heard beforehand was, um, just of how difficult it is. Just wait until you have kids. You think you're tired now, and none of what I was hearing made it like an enjoyable experience, and it would come at the cost of much of who I was. So I didn't understand that, like the cost didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't until like many many years later that I guess I don't know, I guess I matured a little bit as a person, and I realized that having children was, they would be my legacy, not necessarily the work that I would make. I mean, the work that I make is important, but uh, my children are the greatest thing that I, could have ever created. And little did I know that having them was actually a rebirth of myself as an artist. It gave me a new voice that I didn't know that I had. Um, and just an appreciation for my own mother and all of the mothers out there. And that's what this piece is about, is to bring light to that sacrifice, and just give a sacredness to it for the sake of the title, right, of the show. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm getting this kind of, from what you're saying, this overwhelming sense of transformation that there's no way you could be ready for, right?
Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but it's a trip, man. It's a trip. It's a good trip.
Sounds like it. I mean, yeah. Well, I think that this kind of connects to Schetauna, your piece, whether you're physically transforming your piece, which you do a lot in your work, or what's going on in the images in your specific piece. Do you mind kind of sharing what it means to create a visual representation of something as immaterial as emotional caregiving and what that means to you?
Yeah, actually, Corinne, I wanted to ask a favor. If you could actually pull the
Yeah. Have them ready.
like I realize I said that this is a mock-up and no one's actually seen my my work. So the way I work is that I first find the quilt that I like. I learn about that quilt. So this quilt is actually, it's called Grandma's Favorite, and it was made in 1990. But it's actually based off of a crib quilt. Um, so a crib quilt is a type of quilt that little girls would learn how to sew. And it wasn't for a child. It was for like a doll, basically. So you would like sew this tiny, tiny quilt up and use it for your dolls. And it was teaching girls how to sew. This was something that all girls did in America. In fact, the American Girl company that sells you those dolls, they started off making sewing books. So the real product at the American Girl store is the sewn clothes, because that's what that store originated as a sewing company. And the American Girls have some fly clothes. Um, so yes, it was a crib quilt. And then in 1990, a Black woman named it Grandma's Favorite. And I was like, why? Why is this Grandma's favorite? And then I was like, oh, that's why. Because Grandma probably made one of these crib quilts. I just thought it was such a cute name. And I think that's a key part of quilting. It's like the name is going to give you so much information when looking at the quilt and the symbol of the quilt. And then because of that information, you're kind of speaking a language. So mine is Grandma's Favorite, except I made it into a picture frame. Um, and I think that kind of material translation from something that's fiber to something that's wood is also really important in terms of like thinking past what's in front of you and how to update that for another generation. I think there's like intellectual rigor in trying to translate something that's traditional or folk into something that is going to be contemporary and fresh. And my number one goal was to try and communicate this information that is passed down, but in the simplest way possible. So this and like many of my other works, you'll get it, you'll play with it, you'll enjoy it, but it will be based off of some history. And that's how I think I'm approaching that question that you ask, which is how do you turn something immaterial into material? I really think that's not something that you have to do by yourself, but it's something that's given to you, just like a language is something that you learn, but it's not something that you made up. You know, it's something that's been passed down continuously. And that's how I see these quilts. There's like practices that are passed down. There's point of use that's passed down. These are for stories. You know, there's like symbols that are passed down. So that's how you make something immaterial, material. I think it's really a labor of love, and it really shows over time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry I didn't put this picture in the slide. I don't know why that didn't cross my mind. But yeah, this is Shetauna's exhibited piece, everybody. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to turn to Rhonda. Um, your work kind of has this bold, confrontational quality, that challenges these dominant ideas about caregiving, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts on, do you think that we as a society are resistant to seeing caregiving as labor? And then part two of that question, what do we gain or lose by continuing to frame it as this innate selfless act?
Well, first of all, I was surprised to see that you see this piece as confrontational. And I would like to know why you get that vibe.
Well, so I work Fridays and Saturdays. I love that you asked this question. And we've gotten, at least I've gotten, a couple people who really take their time around the gallery, looking at everything, examining it. And about four people have come up to me and been like, I was asking Lena, what's your favorite piece? What sticks out for you? And they always come back to yours. And they say, this one just it confronts you because there's a lot of, these religious figures, and then what
Oh,
was
go up to her is Zelda Fitzgerald. I don't know if anyone recognized her. Zelda Fitzgerald, to the bottom right below the Virgin Mary, with the red hair. Now keep in the middle by the girl in the coffin. Yeah, that's Zelda Fitzgerald up there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and you might notice that I'm kind of a trickster, so of course, if you go up, you'll see the Reardon family, and there's Michael and Tim, and just for fun, I put in Sigmund Freud. So maybe that's where you get this confrontational vibe. It's certainly a poke at psychiatry because I don't know if anyone else has experienced, but being a mother, well, if you've never changed a diaper and you have anxiety, you immediately become a mental patient because anxiety is a psychiatric diagnosis. I have a friend down in Jerome. He's a musician. His name's Tommy Anderson. He's from Rochester, Minnesota, and he's so sweet. Whenever it's his mother's birthday, he will put a picture of his mother on Facebook and he'll make a joke about, well, you've heard of Pink Floyd, but he makes it Pink Freud, and the dark side of your mother. And I mean, mothers are very loving and caring. However, there are some mothers that drown their children. So, and are sent to prison. But back to the Catholic thing with the nuns. Well, everyone talks about, oh, I have a right to abortion. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the flip side of that, which is in vitro fertilization, which I had two of my sons through in vitro fertilization, IVF. There were my eggs, my husband's sperm. We will have been married 38 years this coming Valentine's Day. We've been together 40 years. He's a Jewish attorney from New York City, and we were living in Phoenix at the time. I was at the Arizona Fertility Clinic, laying on the table. I remember crying. They had just transferred the embryo into my uterus. I was laying on the table. I had to lay there quietly for 4 hours. And on that particular day, my husband and I felt very revolutionary because Pope Paul II visited Phoenix and came down Indian School Avenue at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on September 14th, 1987. And my husband and I were being rebels, doing something that was clearly against Catholic Church doctrine of having IVF performed. And at the time, the Catholic Church said that my child was not a human being. And that made me very angry. It still makes me angry. My piece really is about caring for the vulnerable, vulnerable women in society, maybe like me, or maybe like my twin uncles who were mentally handicapped because my grandmother Mary was in labor for 3 or 4 days at a hospital in Omaha, and they didn't get enough air. So as mothers, we make a lot of sacrifices. I remember sticking these syringes, these long needles, into my behind. The needle was 6 inches long, giving myself these hormone injections. So there's a lot of sacrifice of being a mother. And there still is.
I think that touched all of us. Thank you, Rhonda. Kiki, I wanna bring it to you, kind of hearing all these touching responses. There's themes of healing, like Rhonda was talking about. Emily mentioned transformation, and Kim and Schetauna are touching on intergenerational connectedness, right? So in the exhibition, did you notice a particular visual language that kind of emerged?
Like I said, it's such a range of materials. Maybe if
Yeah.
I had to name the visual language that underlies what I see is really the language of the body, right? Whether you had the child physically or through adoption, whether you're the caregiver in a different way, what connects everybody's piece is that they physically held and cared for, you know, practices and took care of the children. And so I think what comes across really strongly for me in this show is there's some really funny pieces. I want to call out one piece. Linda Marcus made this great image called Weighted, which is basically just two giant fiber sculpture breasts on a chair, as if like the mother, the person is actually physically gone and just the tools of breastfeeding are there, right? And I think the labor of feeding, the physical care is there. It's mirrored in this very laborious process of weaving. There's also a sense of bodily repetition. Like Laura Litton has a video called The Mother Load, where cyclically over her life, she's just showing repetitions of what the physical body does to care for another human. Christine Schallenberg and Aurora Tabar did this beautiful performance where they just performed small acts of motherhood. They called it Tiny Precious Objects. And so I feel like it's that language of the body that comes out in many different materials that really seems to be underlying a lot of the work in the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we are unfortunately running out of time, so we're gonna skip our last theme for my panelists, but I do kind of want to wrap up on this open note. As we've discussed, art has the power to challenge these traditional representations of motherhood, right? Um, and we do so by making voices and experiences that have often been overlooked. But beyond this individual representation, there's this larger question of how art can actively shift the broader cultural narrative. So I would love to kind of just open the floor for everybody, and hear your thoughts about how you see your own work contributing to that change. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Perfect.
Also, I want to shout out Luz and I want to shout out Marissa. Thanks for coming today. I think that the number one way that the art of motherhood can transform is just through a general connection, because everyone has a relationship, be it positive, negative, or ambivalent, to your mother. And I think oftentimes being a mother often opens us up to being connected. You have to find a way to connect. And I think it's a really good gift, and a place that's really so disconnected, or individualistic. I think that's something else that I've learned is, by acting through, like, trying to connect people, you are doing that role of mother. Um, but the number one way that the work of motherhood could really change the art world is for it to be bought and acquisitioned and then put into a museum, because that's really what changes art worlds. So yeah.
Love that. Yes, absolutely. Who wants to chime in next?
Sorry, I was busy looking for the reactions there. Yes, buy women's art. Yeah, so I know I probably sound like a broken record. There's a lot of different aspects of motherhood that I'd like to see art, mine in particular address. For example, what it's like to raise, let's say you have a child and the child has a penis and they tell you, it's a boy. And so you raise the child as a boy. And then 16 years later, the boy tells you, well, no, I'm a girl, right? So my daughter is trans. And so that's a whole nother aspect of motherhood that I'm working on separately. So that's something I'd love to see. And I don't say that in order to take away, trans folks need to obviously make their own art and center their own experiences. And that's that. But mothers of trans people have lives and voices too, and so that's the only thing my art tries to talk about is me, my experience. So I'd love to get together with other parents of trans folks and see that. I haven't really seen a lot of that. In fact, I was telling Emily at the show that I have a pietà, right? The mother holding the dead Jesus, right? But he's not dead. It's just his masculinity that has died, right? As he's, turned into female. But yeah, adoptees we don't often get a whole lot of airtime. And, I've Googled over the last couple of years, like adoption in art and things like that. And it's just, I don't see a whole lot of it, so that's something I would like to see. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was a great podcast about spirituality and families and this and that. And the fella just kept connecting, because it's in your DNA, And he kept conflating DNA and your family. And I'm like, no, I'm like yelling at a podcast that can't hear me. So that's something that I'd like to see more out there.
Can I just drop in on that? I feel like there was an artist in the show who really addressed it beautifully in her work. Claire Drummond made a painting, and in her statement, she wrote, mothers, M, and then other, in parentheses, encompass mothers and others, including gender nonconforming folks engaged in nurturing life. And I feel like that's maybe a broader container that a lot of the work falls under. And I'm really delighted that you brought that up, Kim, because I feel like however mother is defined in the contemporary world, it's a much more vast and wide and creative space than sometimes people have given it credit for.
I'll just say for my work, I'm trying to reverse the narrative that I was hearing before I had kids, that it was all just, you know, at least that's what I heard, you know, that it was all just very, very difficult without much return at the end. And but I also wanted to give voice to those women that have had postpartum depression, and I just, you know, I don't see a lot of work about that either, and giving visual to that experience and the real sacrifice. Um, and yeah, I'm just excited to see where this work goes. But I that's what I would like to do with this work, is to just give voice to that experience, but also celebrate that the beauty on the other side of that. Because they, you know, I'm saying all this as like a very new mom. I'm still a new mom. Like my kids are 3 and 1, so I'm at a very different stage of life of, of some of the other artists here. So yeah, we'll see how my work changes, but that's the view I have at the moment.
Yeah, that's that transformation again. Rhonda, I would love to hear from you.
Oh, well, my boys, on the other hand, are, let's see, my youngest son's going to be 35 on President's Day, and he was born, we had a blizzard with 2 feet of snow. I remember at 5:30 in the morning telling my husband, I feel ahead, and there was 2 feet of snow in the driveway, and he said, well, I better get out and start shoveling because we didn't have a snowblower. And I think we made it to the hospital about 12 noon. And I remember the neighbors going by laughing, oh yeah, you just want us to help you dig out so you can take your wife to the hospital. And I think I had my son at 1:30 in the afternoon via C-section. My other son is a medical scientist. He's 30, he'll be 37 in May. And well, I think it's about if you're going to take care of other people, you have to first take care of yourself. I remember when I think I had my first child, I remember maybe being lucky to take a shower once a week just because I was so busy and I didn't have any family around. I was here all alone without any family, without any help. And I think a lot of mothers go through that. Kind of, it's a lonely occupation to be a mother, and it's really hard. So I just really want to give anyone credit who wants to be a mother, because it's really a hard job. And on the other hand, you get a lot back from it.
Oh my goodness. Hearing everybody, all of you guys talk about your experiences makes me want to run home and hug my mom and tell her thank you for everything you've done. You know, I think that everybody can relate to that. Hearing that it's a lonely occupation, I had never thought of it that way. It's an interesting way to think of it, and it makes me sad, but you're right. I mean, it's a gift to be a mother, but it's an incredible sacrifice. So kudos to everybody who is a mother. I'm not one yet, but anyways, I hope you can see that this conversation has revealed so many powerful ways that art can challenge and reclaim and expand this understanding of motherhood and caregiving, right? So I encourage everybody to continue the work, push the boundaries, and have the conversations, most importantly. But at that, we're gonna wrap up this conversation. We do have our artist walkthrough for this exhibition this Saturday. It is at 2 to 4 o'clock. This is just an informal opportunity to meet exhibiting artists and get to hear directly from them, kind of similar to what we did today, just shorter. Each artist will have maybe like 5 to like 8 minutes to talk. But we'll have snacks, we'll have drinks. The event is completely free and open to the public, so I hope to see everybody there. This discussion will be posted on YouTube in the coming days for you guys' later reference. But at that, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank
Bye. Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
It was great to see everybody. Hey, let's take a screenshot. You all want to smile?
Oh yeah, I love that.
All righty, here we go. Let's let people get their cameras on. All right. 1, 2, there's Deb. 1, 2, you know what to do. All right, wait, let me get one more. 1, 2, you know what to do. Yay. All right, I'll send you that, Corinne.
Thank you. And yes, Schetauna, I saw your chat. You can get your work. You can get it at the artist walkthrough if that's, yeah. Anybody who goes to the artist walkthrough can take their work home. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.